Today, you're here to talk to us about the hidden power of heat, something that most of us have been taught to avoid, but that actually may be one of the most powerful tools for improving our cardiovascular health, resilience, and even longevity. I want to kick off today's podcast with some of the most exciting top line data around the power of heat. That is the Finnish studies. Some groundbreaking work over, I think, 20 plus years that's been there. Can you talk to us about those studies to start us off and what they found?
For a century, people in the physiology and medical world talked about heat as something that was always dangerous, right? And then in 2015, a cardiologist in Finland named Jari Laukkanen dove into some data from a big heart disease study that they had done in rural Finland, where they had a terrible problem with men dying of sudden heart attacks. And there were a bunch of lifestyle factors that these guys were asked about. And Laukkanen zeroed in on sauna use, because I think he likes sauna himself. And he noticed that the men who did sauna like every day, did it the most frequently, and actually stayed in there the longest, had about a 50% or more reduction in these fatal heart attacks. So that problem was cut in half. All-cause mortality cut by half, roughly. And then this just jumped out of the data at them that like heat is actually potentially beneficial for these guys. So heat could be like a therapy and not just something that was dangerous. Totally changed the conversation around heat. And so that's what got me going, like, oh my gosh, like I gotta dive into this and see what's happening.
Well, it partially got you going because you were part of a team that co-authored a book. You're the co-author of Outlive, a #1 New York Times bestseller. And in your introduction for your new book, you write how when you guys came across some of that data, you were scratching your heads and debating about whether or not to include it. And ultimately, you decided that you'd present the information, but that it wasn't part of your core recommendation for people to embrace the power of heat and regularly step into things like sauna use. So give us the backstory of how you were skeptical and then you ended up changing your mind as part of this book.
Right. So I think, any kind of epidemiological finding like that needs to be approached with skepticism because it's correlation and you're not proving causation, right? So you have to look a little deeper, and were there confounding effects like social class or, age or, all the usual confounders. But the size of the effect was so big that that said there's probably something there. And then I looked a little deeper, and there are actually some other big studies of things like practices like taking a hot bath. There's a huge study of Japanese people. I think it's in Kyoto or Osaka, one of those cities. It was like 20,000 people. They found that the people who took hot baths every day reduced their heart attack risk, their cardiovascular risk, and their all-cause mortality risk by a similar amount. So that started to tell me that like there's something to the heat story, and that potentially heat therapy should be added to the usual sort of lifestyle interventions that we talk about in the longevity world, which, the usual, fix your diet, exercise in the right ways. And then, sleep was added to it, stress. And now maybe heat should be should be on the menu.
Yeah. You're from Salt Lake, or you live in Salt Lake
Live
and
in
have been
Salt
there
Lake,
for many
yeah.
years. And you talk about in the book how you've generally been somebody that found yourself being gravitated more towards cold.
Yeah,
But one brutal, I think, winter that was particularly cold, there
yeah.
was a little opening, which I think it kind of coincided with this opportunity to write an article in a magazine where
Yep.
you were looking at stepping into regularly using the sauna yourself at your local gym. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so we had this winter, and this was when Outlive was kind of done and going off to the press. We had this really snowy winter, and it was like snowing every day, and every day I was getting up, freezing cold, shoveling 6 inches of snow, cleaning off the car, getting snow down my neck. It was like Groundhog Day. Then drive the kid to school. So I was like, oh my God, I'm like, enough, like this is too much. It's like I'm living in Buffalo or something. And so I just wanted to be warm. And so we have we belong to a gym. And so I would just start going to the sauna in the gym just to be warm. And, it was a typical sort of crummy, you know, gym sauna. No sauna snob would approve of this sauna. It had the sign, the crappy old heater and the sign that says don't put water on the rocks, the whole bit, right? It wasn't even that hot. It was maybe like 160. I started going in there and, going for 5 minutes, going for 10 minutes. I started feeling better and I started feeling better physically and mentally. And that sort of something clicked. I thought, aha, okay, we kind of like, maybe I should look into this Finnish data a little more deeply, you know, because like something's happening here, right? So I felt better mentally and physically. And, there's science suggesting that there might be something to it. So I took a deeper dive. And then at the same time, I could talk about just as luck would have it, I got this assignment from Men's Health magazine, which I've written for 25 years. They're like, hey, look into the science of sweat. And I was like, huh. And I think I was coming out of the gym at that exact time when I checked my phone. I was like, I'm sweaty now, So I took the dive into how we sweat, why we sweat, what happens with heat exposure and heat adaptation and all that fun stuff as well. So the two stories kind of meshed.
Well, we're going to get into some of that information in a minute, but I want to come back to the Finnish studies and break it down a little bit more for our audience.
Let's go.
One of the crazy things about these Finnish studies, and we've written about them in our newsletters, some past podcast guests have brought them up, but sauna use is so common over there that one of the things that they had to do as part of the study is they had two different groups of people. Can you talk about that?
Well, the one group that they didn't have, there was no control group because they couldn't find anybody in this study. It was a study of like 2,300 Finnish dudes from the 80s. They couldn't find anybody who didn't go to sauna. They found like 12 guys who didn't go to sauna, like 12 weirdos. Because there's more saunas in Finland than cars, right? So everybody does it. It's part of your life. And so that was one thing, right? So there's no true control group. But then these guys also were, Finland was not it wasn't the happiest country in the world back then, and it wasn't the healthiest country in the world back then, right? They had a real issue with cardiovascular disease. I think there were a lot of Russian cigarettes and Russian vodka being consumed. And so, this wasn't a terribly healthy population, which is interesting to me because, often those are the populations where you can really move the needle with a simple intervention, similarly to like taking a sedentary group. And I think I just saw a study the other day. It was like, 30 minutes of intense activity a week, like made a huge difference in various parameters. So it was not a healthy group and there wasn't a control group.
Yeah. In fact, inside of the studies, there was the people that were doing the sauna use like 4 to 7 times per week.
Oh yeah.
And,
yeah.
And then the quote unquote control group, because there was no control group, as you mentioned, that wasn't doing sauna at all, because it's so common over there. But the control group was doing it like 1 to 2 times a week.
Yeah. So that's me sometimes. I'm like the control group, if I get busy, like don't get to go to the sauna. These study subjects had filled out like a 10-page questionnaire about all aspects of their life, right? So there's data from this study. It's the Kuopio ischemic heart disease study about all kinds of other things and not sauna, but they had a page of sauna questions. How long do you go in the sauna? How many times a week? How hot is it, do you think? And do you go like less than 10 minutes and all that, a lot of questions about their sauna use. But it's interesting to me. So I think people misinterpret these studies too a little bit. So think about like, let's say 20 years ago, you filled out a questionnaire about, let's just say like your workout habits, right? So what's your workout? You know, how often do you work out? How intensely do you work out? What kind of workout do you do? Do you work out the same way now? Probably not, right?
Yeah, I work out differently than I did 20 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I don't think you can extrapolate a prescription from those studies necessarily. I think directionally, it's really strong case to be made that using sauna fairly frequently is probably good for you, and staying in a little bit longer is probably good for you, but it's not this like precise thing. Like it has to be 176 degrees, you know, like we can't go there. We can go directionally that it's probably good. And it's good across like almost every health condition you can name, like stroke, uh, Alzheimer's disease. These guys, the frequent sauna users had much less Alzheimer's disease, and we can go into that. Um, they seem to have better sort of glucose control, you know. Um, and then the most interesting, and we'll talk about this, but was they had 80% fewer psychotic episodes in their life. Like that is a really interesting finding, I think.
Well, let's go into some of that because if there's anybody
Sure.
that looks at sort of weighing all the data along with what's available to us so we don't sensationalize it, but that we actually take away the directional information and apply it to our life, it's going to be you. You're the guy, right? Which is why we have you
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
So, heart disease is the number one killer of men, but also, my audience is like 75% women. And a lot of women, when they hear the stats that, yeah, okay, breast cancer gets a lot of attention, other cancers get a lot of attention, Alzheimer's disease, which is also super important for women.
Yeah.
Women are diagnosed at twice the rate of Alzheimer's disease as men. But when they hear that cardiovascular disease is still the number one killer of women, sometimes there's like, oh wow, I forgot about
Yeah.
that or I didn't know about that. So when you look at what actually is going on in the body that would allow sauna in a way to replicate light or moderate exercise, as you talk about in the book, and be beneficial for your heart, how is that happening through the power of heat?
When we're in a hot environment, one of the first things that happens, and that could be outside or it could be in a sauna, our body's trying to like maintain a constant internal temperature, more or less. And so one of the first things that happens is your heart rate goes up, right? Your heart rate speeds up, accelerates, so you get more blood flow. And more of that blood is going to your skin to try and like radiate the heat off into the environment, right? That happens even before we sweat. And so blood flow under your skin can go up like 16-fold, right? It's a lot of blood just right under the surface of your skin, especially like in your fingers, the extremities. Like you get a lot of circulation to your fingers and toes, right? So it's whooshing through under your skin. And so heart rate goes up. It's like you're going for, like it's like light aerobic exercise, right? And depending on, it mounts steadily over time. I've noticed it like you're wearing a monitor, but if you're in there for a while, it can get up to like, above 100. And so it's like essentially like a light jog. So it's like light exercise, but you don't have the muscle activation, but you have the cardiovascular, and you also have the dilation of blood vessels, and nitric oxide gets released, and all that's good. And all that's why that it kind of explains why one of the most consistent benefits, observed in sort of short-term sauna protocols is this like reduction in blood pressure, similar to exercise. And then interestingly, there was just something that popped up the other day that I think you called out that people who use sauna regularly had a lower heart rate, like at night. Like this is wearable data, right? And so that's a kind of what happens with exercise too. Your heart
Yeah,
rate.
the more you work out your heart during the day and give it some good stress, you end up in a
Yep.
situation that when you're not working out and you're relaxing, your heart rate is lower.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is cool. Yeah. And
Is
and then there are other things that happen as well, right? Uh like sleep is a big one, right? And that, I like to do sauna thing in the afternoon or the evening, and then you have that like body temperature coming down, and that kind of helps you relax and go to sleep. It's kind of a signal because your body temperature fluctuates during the day and night, right? It's up during the day, goes down at night, reaches a bottom sometime late at night, then starts to go back up in the morning.
Yeah, there's some really great data that came out earlier this year that I've heard you talk about. Was it last year or early this year? We'll link to it in the show notes. We wrote a newsletter about it. That anybody who's listening that's worried that, okay, I don't have a sauna. There are other ways also to incorporate these benefits. We're going to go through all of them, but just as a preview, because we love to give value right away in the beginning part of the episode, is that a warm bath can replicate many of these things. Like
Absolutely.
a hot bath, we don't want anybody to burn, but a warm bath, there's strong data that's there that you can get some of those same benefits that also can improve many of the things that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there was the hot bath study I mentioned, and then there's short-term data from Chris Minson at the University of Oregon has put people in, a hot tub for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and it has the same sort of heart rate elevation, the blood vessel dilation, endothelial function improves. So blood vessel lining of your blood vessels, all that improves in just a good old hot tub, right? Or a good old hot bath. So heat is heat in a way. And in a way, I find that that's sort of validating. That sort of validates this idea that heat is good for you. It's not just some special kind of heat, right? It's any kind of heat exposure, and it could be infrared as well. There's some good data around infrared.
Yeah, just a little side note that I want to work into here because we're talking about sleep, we're talking about infrared, is that as part of this your initial sort of N of one experiments during this time, sleep was one of the first things that you noticed. You had never really felt like from what I understand, like sometimes your brain would just be on at night, right? You'd be thinking about stuff. Do you want to talk about your own personal experience with heat and sleep?
Yeah, I in this period when I started going to the gym sauna, one of the first things I noticed is that my brain was a little quieter at night, and so that was kind of nice. And I don't know if that was potentially due to the light exercise effect. You sleep better after you do like some aerobic activity during the day, so that may have been part of it. It could have been, temperature elevated, then kind of going down and signaling that it's time to go to sleep, or it could have been, it could be something else, like the sort of antidepressive effects or anti-anxiety effects of heat exposure that have been observed in some studies.
Yeah. Well, since we're on that N of one story,
Yeah.
part of that story for you is also too the anti-anxiety, depressive. You noticed at one period of time that you might have been struggling with a little bit of depression,
Oh, for sure.
and heat came into the story as part of that as well. Do you mind talking about that?
I started talking to some mental health researchers, a guy named Chuck Raison from Wisconsin, and then Ashley Mason from UCSF. Both super interesting. And Chuck's a little older, and he'd been looking into the relation between like heat and like some of the kind of Buddhist meditation practices, and how these monks would like generate heat within their bodies. He's like, is heat the pathway to, or the key to enlightenment? And so he incorporated that. Anyways, long story, incorporated that into his mental health research, and he's kind of looking for alternatives to SSRI medications, right? So he's trying different things, and one of the things they tried was this heat treatment. So you heat people up in basically an individual infrared chamber, and get their body temperature up to 101.3 Fahrenheit, which seems to be the magical temperature level at which like some good adaptations happen physically. And so he did this to like, I think it was like 16 patients. And then there was a control group that was put in the thing and kind of just warmed up. These are severely depressed patients. And they found that their depression symptoms just kind of like went away in some cases, or were cut in half by average. So that's a huge effect, right?
It's
Bigger than
huge.
like, yeah, and bigger than any placebo effect or any medication can accomplish. And so they've pushed that story, and they were doing a story in Colorado, and I was like, oh, I'll try out your protocol because I like to like experience things and not just kind of like lecture people. Like I want to like feel it. You know, it makes it more real. You come out with a good story. It might kind of suck while you're doing it, but it's still a good story. So I thought I'll do it. It'll be a good story. And I was thinking like, okay, they're using this. I think it was the Hamilton Depression Scale. I'll just take the questionnaire, and lo and behold, I'm like, oh, I'm like solidly moderately depressed. That's interesting. So maybe I actually need this. I had there were various things going on, that would explain that. They don't. We had some medical issues in our house, and stuff that was kind of tough to deal with. And being a writer, if you're like a happy, well-adjusted person, you don't necessarily become a anyway. So I went and did this study, and it was, it was terrible. It was like really difficult. It was like over an hour in this personal infrared sauna. I, it was heating me up, and I'm sweating buckets, and I have a temperature probe, where the sun don't shine. And they're monitoring me, and they're like, you know, Ashley, one of the researchers, Ashley Mason, was like rubbing ice cubes on my face to like keep me from losing my mind. Anyway, it was really tough, right? So I was like, you have to be really pretty depressed to like make this seem appealing. And then at the end, the temperature gets up to a certain level, to that 101. And then they dunked me in the cold plunge, which I didn't feel as good as I wanted it to. I think it was like a little too cold. And I thought, man, this was rugged. Like I'd have to be way more depressed to make this protocol seem attractive. Then I go home, go back to the hotel, have a meal, sleep, and then I'm driving home the next day, and it's like the sky opens up. It's like, "Whoa," I'm feeling like it's like euphoric state. And it's like, wow, like this, I'm feeling something. And then the next couple weeks, I'm like all motivated. I'm not depressed anymore, getting lots of work done. I just feel fantastic. And that's N of one. So your mileage may vary, but it was quite an experience.
Yeah, it sounds like quite an experience. Definitely tough as you're describing it, but also some of the things that you're proposing inside of this book is not that we have everything figured out with heat, but if that we
Far
actually
from it.
step back into the power of heat in our lives, it makes us more resilient, and it can be an adjunct to other things that we might be doing. So if I was somebody that was struggling with depression, in addition to any other traditional outlets I might be looking at, and some of the interesting data that's out there about some supplemental things like maybe, this is again, maybe omega-3 fish oil, etc., that's out there. I would say, what do I have to lose when it comes to heat? Maybe, even if it doesn't immediately help my depression, my heart's going to be stronger. I'm going to be more resilient. I'm going to feel like
Yeah.
can take on more of the world. So at least should be part of the conversation when it comes to discussing, because the biggest component is, besides some of the data that sounds really exciting, what are the downsides except for extreme situations, which you also highlight inside of the book too. Sorry to interrupt, but memory loss is on the rise. And that's why I've created a free guide that you can get right now featuring the top brain boosting foods that you can include into your diet starting today to help you combat this. I've worked with a few of my friends to feature 5 foods in this free guide. And guess what? A couple of them will probably surprise you. Make sure you're one of the people that focuses on keeping your brain sharp by downloading this guide today. Just click on the link below or scan the QR code, and I'll send you the guide right away.
Yeah. As long as you're not, don't pass out in the sauna. I mean, that's the key. And yeah, do it in a safe way. And work into it, baby steps. I think that's another issue with like a lot of people out there putting out these like one size fits all protocols. Like, like, like right out the gate, you have to go in for 20 minutes at like 190 degrees. Like, I don't think that's not a great idea, right? And especially
Yeah,
for since your listeners are, you have a lot of female listeners, you know, an experience of a 120-pound woman in a sauna is going to be very different from a 180-pound guy, right? It's just a
absolutely.
different on the mental health thing. It's really interesting when like science catches up to something that people have been doing for thousands of years. And I don't think that people in Finland or people in, you know, the Middle East were going to the hammam or the sauna or the Roman bath um, to simulate light exercise, right? It wasn't like they weren't like working on their cardiovascular health, right? They were just there because it made them feel good.
Yeah, or it made them feel good, or was part of a deep-seated ritual as part of their
Yeah,
society
yeah.
and a way of
Social,
bonding
yeah,
and
yeah,
social, which is a huge through line through
yep,
your book and
yep,
something that we've obviously lost in our sort of modern world.
yeah,
Couple more things that we mentioned that I just want to touch on before we continue down the story of the book, and a little bit of the interesting understanding about evolutionary biology, about why us as human beings
yeah.
are so wired to be hot. We're going to get there in a second. Okay. We
I get
promised we're going to
excited.
talk
Yeah,
about two more things: Alzheimer's and the
yeah.
reduced risk of psychotic episodes. So, the Alzheimer's data, the top line sounds pretty wild. Can you just repeat it again from the Finnish studies?
They found that this elite sauna group, the 4 to 7 times a week people, um, had like a 63% reduction in the rate of Alzheimer's disease over the study period, which is incredible, right? Huge effect. Like there's no diet, there's certainly no medication um, that does that. And the really interesting thing about that finding is it was repeated by a totally different group, totally different research group, looking at a totally different group of people, right? They looked at like 13,000 people, patients of like mobile health clinics in Finland. So economically diverse group from the 70s, right? And they found that there was a similar reduction in Alzheimer's disease and dementia, all kinds of dementia over the 20 years, which
Yeah,
was really interesting. So it's like confirmed.
definitely. And how do you want our listener, who we've taken polls of our audience, both audio as well as our newsletter audience, and Alzheimer's disease is one of the scariest diseases, cognitive decline, dementia.
Yeah.
I've had a grandparent that struggled with dementia um, at the end of his life, and it's scary for all the reasons that everybody knows, because you feel like nothing is scarier than losing your sense of self and not knowing who you are. In some ways, it's even scarier than cancer, which is one of the scariest diseases that are out there.
Yeah.
How do you want our audience to be thinking about that in their life, and understand what the data shows, and if there are any limitations, and how they might be thinking about their own risk reduction of this very scary top four killers that you've outlined in the
Yeah.
book, Outlive.
In my first book on longevity, I call these diseases the horsemen, the four horsemen.
Yeah, the four horsemen. Yep.
And, one of my takeaways of, writing about this topic for more than 15 years is really how much we don't know. And Alzheimer's is like the premier example of that. We don't really have a great theory about how to treat the disease, right? Or even why how it starts, how it progresses. We don't have a great idea about that. But we do know ways to like reduce risk. And so there is an element of prevention that becomes crucial, right? And, you know, aerobic exercise in particular is really important part of that, right? And metabolic health is an important part of that. With sauna data, that's why it was so striking that the two studies found that sauna use um, reduces Alzheimer's risk significantly. And so we can talk about why that might be, but one obvious reason might be this improved blood flow that we're talking about. So it might keep, your vasculature, cerebral vasculature in better shape, as you get older. Like that's huge. Just that is a huge effect.
Yeah. And with Alzheimer's disease, as you mentioned, there's so much that we don't know, but there are some things that are connected with other diseases that are out there. We know that the worse off your metabolic health is, and individuals that are diagnosed with diabetes have a much higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. So when you think about sauna and some of the original components you mentioned, it simulates light to moderate exercise. That's
Right.
going to be, in a way, components that are helping with your metabolism, not as strongly as moving your muscles in
No.
aerobic activity, strength training, some other things that we know that are out there, but still giving that positive stress to your arteries, your endothelium. You're getting the nitric oxide, which seems to be have some play in when it comes to reducing our risk of Alzheimer's disease. So at least something that can be thought of as a regular usage as part of the things that we're weighing. Everybody's weighing out, okay, I have my diet, I have my sleep, I have my exercise, I have, maybe some basic supplementation that I take, stress, community. We're all weighing out components of how to do these things without going crazy, especially in this modern world where every guru that's out there wants us to do 20,000 different things to be in the perfect health.
Yeah, there aren't enough hours in the day.
There aren't enough hours in the day. But a big but, when it comes to something like sauna, if somebody was worried about it, it sounds like after reading the book and hearing you here, it's like, hey, in addition to all of the benefits that are there, this seems like something that could be promising for risk reduction when it comes to Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline.
Absolutely. I think there's a good case to be made for that. And, it may just go back to this idea that when we're exercising, or when we're in a sauna, we're just sending more blood around. More blood is like whooshing through our brain and our organs, and it's kind of flushing out things, right? And bringing good things where they're needed, right? And so it's just that that circulation is might be most of it. We haven't talked about the heat shock proteins yet.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's chat about them because those play a role in everything, but they play a
Those are
role
cool.
in just general brain health, which would relate to Alzheimer's disease, cognitive decline, but also this idea of possibly reducing psychotic episodes for people that are dealing with, major mental health disorders. So let's talk about those heat shock proteins.
Yeah. So these are really interesting little molecules that they're kind of discovered in an interesting way. Some Italian scientist, I think, left his cell culture out under the lamp too long, and he was like, oh no. He came back. He thought it would be like cooked, and in fact, he found that these cells had like activated these proteins that had protected them from the heat stress. And they're called heat shock proteins because of the way they were discovered. They're really stress proteins, but heat is a form of stress that activates them. Yeah, one of my sources described them as mommy proteins. So they take care of the mommy proteins, like take care. This is a woman who said this, by the way, the other proteins and other sort of machinery in the cell and even like DNA, right? So they keep DNA from degrading. They keep these other cellular, structures from degrading. They cellular membranes are more resilient, right? Stress resistant. And then they clean out a lot of the crap that like accumulates in our cells just from being alive, right? And so that points to another potential benefit in terms of the cognitive decline, right? It might help clear out waste from our neurons. So they're
Yeah.
pretty cool things. And again, 101.3 Fahrenheit, that's kind of where that's the sweet spot where these things are activated.
Yeah. When you talk about that sweet spot and you reverse engineer some of the sauna recommendations or heat recommendations from people that are out today, the biggest one being that a lot of people hear that, 180 degrees for 20 minutes or 190 degrees for 20 minutes. What are you seeing for a person that weighs about, like 170, 160? what have you seen, or is there a way for our audience to take that, magic number of 101? What does it take? How much heat stress do you need to get you there? Or it's so different for every person?
It's different for every person, in a Finnish sauna, and especially it takes a while, because the interesting thing about Finnish style sauna is, especially if you're doing the water on the rocks and getting the steam, your skin is actually quite hot, but your core takes a while to heat up. And
Yeah.
that's why the studies use that infrared um, sauna. And that's why a lot of these, other hyperthermia studies use hot water. So a hot bath actually gets your body temperature up more quickly,
Yeah, that's an
interestingly enough.
important thing because I think when some of this data came out, initially people were like, "Oh, you can't do infrared. Infrared saunas are they don't do
Yeah.
this, they don't
There's
do
a lot of
that."
hate. Yeah.
There's a lot of hate on infrared, but really winding back and hearing what you're saying is that infrared can be just as powerful. And sometimes, if it's something that you can tolerate better, stay in longer, your core body temperature could get hotter quicker, which would allow you
Yeah.
to reap those rewards. So
Exactly.
there's pros and cons of all these different interventions that are there.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, one of my things with any kind of lifestyle intervention is you have to do the one that you like and that makes sense for you. And if you happen to like sitting in hot water, that's great. And if you happen to like sitting in a Finnish sauna, that's great too. Um, or in infrared, you don't get that. Some people find that the sense of heat overwhelming, and infrared's a lower temperature. Anyway, there's so many different ways to skin a cat, but
Yeah.
it takes a while to get your temp up to 101.3. And by the way, you can do it, on a hot bike ride in the summer, pretty quick. That works really
Yeah.
well.
Let's zoom out a little bit because
Sure.
a huge part of this story is that we were literally designed, our human body, our biology is designed to embrace heat. It's a huge part of our story. And if you look at modern life has largely, through all the beautiful things that we all get a chance to enjoy, including AC, we've removed a lot of that heat that's there. So as we've talked about already, that heat has many benefits that are there, but help our audience understand just how deeply heat is a part of our story in our evolution.
Yeah, and sweating especially,
And sweating.
we're basically the only animal that sweats to cool itself. Um, and, you know, evolution, it turns out, really, really likes sweating. And so, like a million years ago or more, our ancestors, and these are pre-human ancestors, right? So they underwent a series of genetic mutations, like really rapid genetic mutations, and they all ended up spreading these eccrine sweat glands all over our bodies. And eccrine sweat glands, so there's two kinds of sweat glands. There's the kind like in your armpits, those are the gross ones, apocrine. And then eccrine are harmless. They just put out water and salt. So that's good sweat, right? That's when you're working out and when you're hot, like that's the sweat that comes out. Anyway, we have those. Dogs, deer, most other mammals don't. Um, and so because our ancestors were able to cool themselves, they were able to operate and function during the heat of the day, right? When most animals were hiding in the shade. So we had this advantage. We could be outside. And then, coming into like as humans evolved and became a little more smarter, right? Sophisticated. Um, we, and this was a theory from a professor at the University of Utah, which is, a mile from where I'm sitting. And I think he was a trail runner, right, in the mountains. And he noticed, he came up with this idea that our ability to sweat basically allowed us to, we became like endurance machines. We were like superhuman. That's maybe the wrong word. We were incredible endurance athletes that even though we couldn't run as fast as like an antelope or, a prey animal, we could eventually run these animals down. Our ancestors could run these animals down over time because we could cool ourselves and they couldn't. And so, like, if you think about like walking your dog on a hot day, the dog will be panting, right? Trying to cool itself. And the only way it can cool itself is by panting. You're sweating. You might not love it, but you're doing much better than the dog, right? You could outlast the dog. And so that was the theory of persistence hunting. And then that let us go from being kind of like, a tasty snack in the food chain to being on top of the food chain.
Yeah. It's that combination of our ability to tolerate heat through sweating and be able to do things that just other animals couldn't do.
Yeah.
And along with that narrative is that because we grew up around nature, we evolved around the environment that already existed, not the other
Yeah.
way around. The environment didn't evolve around us. And we were just used to heat being more a part of the equation. Of course, we lived in colder environments as well too, but heat was a huge part of that narrative. And we've engineered that heat out of our life.
Yeah. Just in the last few decades, if, you took like our whole 300,000 year history and put it into 1 year, I think air conditioning is like 30 minutes ago, was invented 30 minutes ago, something like that. So very recent, right? Even like our grandparents didn't have air conditioning and, they probably wanted to have air conditioning at times, it, it's comfortable. It's great for sleeping. Here's how much we wanted to defeat heat. The first ice machine was invented in like 1850. So before electricity, right? This guy, crazy guy in Florida, he was actually a doctor and he was trying to treat patients who came down with tropical diseases like yellow fever, had these terrible fevers. His patients were, it was hot, obviously in Florida, Apalachicola, Florida. And somehow he put these physical principles together of compressing gases and then letting them expand. And he could create ice. It's a
Yeah.
crazy invention. It was before the air conditioner, before electricity. Before that,
For
they had,
refrigeration. Yep.
yeah, before that, they had to, there was a whole business of like chopping the ice out of ponds in like New England. And they would put them on train cars and send them to the South or put them on boats and ship them to India, you
Crazy.
know, like a month long journey. And then, colonial Brits in India would stir it into their drinks.
The efforts that we went
Relief from the heat. Yeah.
relief from the heat.
But at the same time, there's benefits to that too. But we can
Yeah,
talk about
there's
that.
benefits to it too.
Yeah.
And just like so many different things, processed food, walking. We just had Dr. Courtney Conley on the podcast recently, who also talks about sweating inside of her book as well too. I don't know if you guys have met each other, but
No,
you guys have
that's great.
very simpatico. She's focusing on the power of walking and how humans were, like designed to walk. And you're talking about how heat is a crucial part of our story and our evolution. And you both touch on sweating as being a big part of what's allowed us for that. But pulling off that tangent, something interesting that I learned about sweating that I didn't even know, just how many sweat glands
Yeah.
we have
It's crazy.
in our body. Can you
Millions.
tell our audience about that?
Millions. It's like 2 to 4 million on average. And so there's like hundreds per square centimeter in some parts of our body. So like on your forehead, there are a lot because your brain, like a lot of this is like protect the brain, right? And the brain kind of like, yeah, we have like a lot of little thermostats in our brain. And so that's, if our head gets hot, we'll sweat. We sweat on our back. Interestingly, evolutionarily, these eccrine sweat glands actually came from animals' feet, paws. And so it was really like foot sweat that like evolution decided to spread all over our body and use for a different purpose. Sweat gland activation is a whole different story. So not all these sweat glands are activated all the time, and you might have more sweat glands activated than me or vice versa. or you might sweat more than I do. It's all very different. It's not fully understood why certain people seem to sweat more or be more effective at cooling themselves. But with training, you can improve your ability to sweat. And so you feel less uncomfortable on a hot day.
Yeah, there's that adaptation that happens that the more you expose yourself in a way that's not crazy jumping into it, the more you expose yourself to heat, you get used to the heat and you become better at handling the heat that's there. We can't talk about sweat and the power of heat without talking about detoxification. The wellness community has talked
Uh-oh.
about detoxification as being a central thing that's there. And you have a whole chapter inside of the book. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because it's on topic right now. What do you want to tell us about detoxification and maybe some of the myths that have been around there? Sweating is powerful. There's a lot of things that come along with sweating, and sweating is really first and foremost designed to cool the body. And there seems to be some mild level of detoxification, but burst some bubbles here when it comes to detox sweating.
Yeah, the toxins, it's a tough one. It's a big topic in the wellness world, but sort of officially, right? Your skin isn't like a detox organ. It's your kidneys and your liver, right? That are filtering out stuff from your blood and your body that shouldn't be there, right? Medicine kind of dismisses it, right? And I think correctly, I think a small amount of bad stuff comes out, but I think that's just stuff that's present in your not only your blood plasma, but your intercellular fluid and in your cells. But it's not like a preferential way to get rid of toxins, right? It's not a very efficient way to get rid of toxins, right? That said, people really cling to this idea. And so I sort of like thought about it. And, after a good like sauna session, you do feel purified, right? And your skin feels really good. So I think it does it cleans your skin really well. And that was the original function of sauna. That's why you went to these different bathing traditions, or the hammam or the Roman bath. Even the sweat lodge, right, had a cleansing function. So you feel cleansed, right? You're not necessarily chemically detoxified. But again, this has not been well studied, right? And the concentrations are very tiny, and these things are difficult to measure. And so I'm leaving the door open to maybe someday we'll figure out that somehow it does activate our detoxification organs in a certain way, but so far not really.
Yeah, when I read that section of the book, the thing that I walked away with is that, hey, there may not be there right now. Maybe some stuff comes in the future, but zooming out and looking at the totality of the information around sauna use, which I've shared with you, I've been like really trying to get my parents on the train. My dad does a pretty good job, thanks to my brother-in-law, who's a cardiologist, who really sort of encourages him, and they do sauna together sometimes. And my sister, who helps me out with the podcast, my older sister, shout out to my big sister. My
Okay.
mom is a little bit more like, I don't like the hot or other stuff that's out there. But anyways, what I was mentioning around this is that looking at the totality of the information and the data is that, there's not the strong data that's out there that this is a good vehicle for detoxification.
No.
But so what? There's all these other benefits that are out
Yeah.
there. And even if you feel, mentally detoxified because you're not bringing your device inside of the sauna, so you get a little bit of a break. A lot of people like to do a meditation inside of
Mhm.
there, right? Your skin feels better. You have this moment for yourself, and sometimes you have this moment with other people where you end up having these really beautiful conversations inside of a sauna, reflective things that are there. So even if you're not getting the chemical detoxification that a lot of people are looking for, there's so many other digital detoxifications and other things that end up coming with sauna use.
Totally. And I would add to that, we talked earlier about the increased circulation, right? And I think that just also flushes a lot of crap out of various parts of your body. So, I think there's something to that, but you're not oozing mercury out of your skin. And in fact, interestingly, there's some suggestion that, if you go into a sauna with toxic crap on your skin, it might end up going in.
Yeah. You were talking
So
about the firefighters
yeah,
and some of their exposure inside of the book.
yeah.
Can you just chat about that? Because that's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, and that's a real problem. And firefighters have tremendous exposure to all kinds of bad stuff, and they look seriously and intently at sweating and different kinds of sauna type protocols for detoxification. But I think the International Association of Firefighters finally commissioned a study and concluded that it's really not that effective, and that potentially you might, if you have stuff on your skin, it might potentially go the other way, the way you don't want it.
Yeah. When I read that and I thought about, well, how does that maybe apply to some of our listeners or me in my own life? One of the challenges that we have in modern day society, and I'm not going to rank it as one of the biggest problems that's there, but one of the challenges is that many people are wearing, synthetic clothing, and myself
Hmm.
included. Some of the most comfortable clothing that I've owned over the years is, half polyester or, rayon or this rayon or this thing. And I thought about, oh man, like before a sauna, or at least especially after a sauna where your pores are really opened up throughout your body, maybe I don't want to be slipping on if I have an option. Just choose more natural fibers, cotton, other things like that, instead of choosing some of these things which we know have through our modern washer, dryer system, everything like that. We know that there's a tiny level of microplastic exposure from all this plastic clothing that we're wearing there. Again, it's a minor thing and we're not trying to major in the minors, but it was a little
To
thing where I was
coin a
like, oh yeah,
phrase,
you know
yeah.
what? After sauna, I should really be wearing more cotton, other stuff, things like that, instead of plastic clothing.
The Finnish solution to that problem is to wear nothing.
Yeah.
The most natural fiber.
Yeah. Wear your birthday clothes.
Not always acceptable.
Not always acceptable in our culture over here. Uh, but a lot of the cultures, although I went to a really cool bathhouse sauna place. It was actually it's a famous place. It's in Santa Fe. I don't know if you've ever been there before. It's called 10,000 Waves.
Oh yeah, I've heard of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
want
I,
to
I
go.
went on
Yeah,
a boys trip a few years ago and we really didn't even know what we were getting into. It's this sort of almost Japanese
yeah.
inspired bathhouse. And it's really cool. You have people of all different ages. And we went there. We all got ready to go into our first sauna. And, we look like amateurs because we're wearing, like our shorts and a robe and whatever. And then we went into this sauna and it was filled with like 95% senior citizens. And I would say that 75% of them were butt naked. And my first buddy who went in, he almost thought he went into the wrong room. Every room is like that, by the way. And I was like, you know what?
Didn't know
This
that.
is the benefit of getting older and wiser. You just do not care. And you're not trying to put up a front. And you're just like, I'm just going to do my thing.
Nothing to hide.
Another interesting tidbit, little things, I wrote some interesting notes as I was going through your book
Yeah.
that are related to, the power of heat and our body and how our body uses heat. So only about 20% of the energy during exercise. I'm a huge fan of exercise. We talk about it on our podcast a lot, our audience. Only 20% of the energy around exercise becomes movement and 80% becomes heat.
Yeah.
Why is that interesting? And what should our audience take away from that?
I found that information devastating, actually, to realize that we're wasting so much energy. And like I'm trying to ride my bike up a hill, and 80% of it is turning into heat and not pushing me up the hill. So that really kind of made me angry. But it's like your car, right? So you drive your car and the engine gets hot and you have to have a whole cooling system to keep the engine running. And it's a similar phenomenon. It's a similar level of inefficiency, frankly. That's why even in cooler climates, right? You see people jogging and it's 40 degrees out and they're wearing shorts, right? We just generate a tremendous amount of heat. And that's why we have this, partly why we have this cooling system, to offload all that heat so that, like your car, our engine can operate more efficiently.
It really gives you an appreciation for the role of heat.
Yeah.
in our life. And, for the folks that are listening, sometimes I like to flip the question and give the opposite. If somebody's out there and they're auditing their life and they're like, I do not embrace the power of heat on a regular basis. I'm getting older in my years. What is it costing them? When somebody just doesn't embrace the power of heat, goes out of their way to be very comfortable all the time in their car, in their house, isn't stepping into the sauna, isn't doing that, isn't embracing the heat through working out, as you were mentioning this little, factoid. What is that? What is that costing them?
Well, it's a little bit similar to like not exercising, right? In our society, it's really easy to not only not exercise, but not walk, right? Not get any physical activity of any kind. You can have your groceries delivered and you don't have to lift a finger essentially. You know, the heat thing is not as severe as that, but you're kind of missing out on well, all the like the cardiovascular benefits that we've talked about, the stuff from the Finnish sauna studies, the Alzheimer's disease prevention. This is what you're missing out on not doing like heat therapy type things, heat bathing types of practices. In terms of like athletes or there's a heat adaptation effect, which is it's like a performance enhancing um, modality. It's like altitude training. So I avoided the heat myself for a long time. It was a story I told myself, like, I don't do well in the heat. I was an amateur bicycle racer, um, when I was younger. And I was like, oh, I don't do well in the heat. I only do well when it's like 50 degrees. And like everybody does well when it's, runners, that's the ideal temperature. And you can actually, I didn't know that you could actually train yourself and lean into it and then get benefits from actually leaning into the heat in a safe way.
You can't talk about heat without talking a little bit about cold.
Yeah.
Contrast therapy and cold plunging has become very popular. We've even done episodes here on this podcast about it. And I've shared how just like I go to the sauna with my buddies at the gym and it's a great opportunity to connect. We've used it no different than probably a lot of people are using cold therapy, whether that's cryotherapy at this local spot that we go to here in Los Angeles, or cold plunging. It's kind of like a fun, challenging thing that we do to get each other hype and excited. And
Yeah.
and I have felt anecdotally, you were talking about the study that you did where they were taking you through the depression study and the infrared sauna and dunking you afterwards in the cold,
Yeah.
which sounds like it wasn't really a contrast therapy protocol, but was more to help bring down your core temperature so that it wasn't harmful for you? Or were they actually trying to do contrast therapy in that?
No, I think they were actually trying to study the two in conjunction. That was the point of
Okay.
that study. So the heat and the hyperthermia, and then plop you in a cold plunge, and that has a long history as a mental health intervention, going back to like 18th century mental hospitals, mental institutions. They would just kind of dunk patients in cold water like without warning, like with
Crazy.
like a trap door. And so, it shocks you, right? So whatever you're in, that's a great way to get out of whatever mental loop you might be in, right? Go do something else or get a surprise and you're not worrying about, all your problems. So jump in a cold plunge, all of a sudden you have your problems over here, but you have a big problem, which is that you're in ice cold water that can kill you. Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the thing you have to think about.
You can't think about a lot of other things when you get
No,
really
no.
cold.
You
You're
have no other
very
problems.
present. It brings
Yeah.
you into the
It
present
sure does.
moment.
And I'm a little bit of a cold plunge skeptic. Like I don't think the science is as robust as on the heat side, but it does have its uses and it's fun to do with other people. And if I'm in the right at the right time, it's perfect. And it's great to help you cool down so you can get back in the sauna. And that's how people use it in Finland. That's all it is. You just cool down. It's a way of cooling down.
So zooming out, because you wrote a whole section in the book about it, the data around especially this aggressive cold plunging movement that's out there in modern sort of Instagram culture, not strong to weak. And along with that, the best use of cold, when we look at historically and some of these studies that you've been, a part of yourself, is in relationship to heat and the contrast that goes in together. That's the takeaway for our audience. Did I get that right?
It's a compliment. I think it does have like mood benefits, but sometimes like I'm not up for it. Like I don't need another stressful thing that day. And it's a very stressful experience, I think more so than heat. Cold is like an existential threat, really. Um, this is another astonishing thing I learned, but like 10 times as many people die for causes related to cold as to
Mm.
heat compared to heat.
Wow.
And your body has a real like cold shock response um, that's very sudden. If you're in the wrong situation, it can lead to drowning. So if you're jumping into cold water and you suck in a big mouthful of, and it happens to be water and not air, it could be bad. You can have a heart attack for older men. Um, and I think really like in this sort of gym bro world, like it doesn't help you build muscle. I think that's the biggest issue with it from that perspective. It
Yeah.
shuts down muscle protein synthesis, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why you've seen a lot of the updated recommendations for the people that are a fan of cold exposure of, 4 to 6 hours away from exercise if you're
Yeah.
trying to be
Yeah.
safe.
Yeah. That said, I love it when it's, 98 degrees out. I'll go to my local sauna place, which has an awesome cold plunge and hop in and I feel great the rest of the day. So it has
Yeah.
its uses. Yeah.
And I'm not as consistent with cold as I am with heat. And I think you find that with a lot of people, right? You find that with a lot of people, even if they're fans of cold exposure, uh, just consistency over time. It's easier to be consistent with heat than it is to be
Yeah.
consistent with that cold exposure.
Yeah. And if you go back to like our evolutionary past or just our ancestral past, our grandparents' past, like they had to deal with like cold. Um, cold was a problem, right? So if when people moved to like North America or migrated up to Finland, and you're dealing with a lot of like non-ideal cold temperatures all of a sudden. Even though we evolved in the heat, right? We've migrated in the last 40-ish thousand years to some very cold places, right? So cold adaptation is, it is a thing like in terms of our past.
Gil, as we're winding down over here, and I still have this fantastic thread that I want to talk about here that you shared on X the other day, because I look at this conversation around heat and I see it as part of this through line that I've been sharing with my audience for the past few years and being very open about my own story when it comes to health and wellness. That many times I've gotten distracted by the latest fad, or I've been convinced by somebody about this minor aspect of health and how it should be one of the main priorities. And really, the message to the audience over the last few years, which has followed my own journey, has been double down on the basics. And you
Yep.
wrote this fantastic thread. And before we walk through some of the key things that you talked about in there, I think you have 5 key insights. Is there anything else that you want to share about this fantastic book, Hot Wired, um, with our audience here?
I think the biggest thing for me was to take something that I kind of thought I didn't like, that I couldn't benefit from, and sort of peeled back the onion and found that it's been sort of life changing in a number of different ways. I mean, the most basic is, I used to kind of get fat in the summer because I would stay inside in the air conditioning, and now I like go out and hike, ride my bike, and all safely, but like I can I can function, right? I can enjoy my life in the summer. And then I can also use this tremendously powerful modality of sauna to sort of, it can be like a little bit of a substitute for exercise, but it also helps quiet my mind, which I think is a more important um, thing for me. And it's a refuge, as you said. It's like you don't have your phone, you're not worrying about tweets. Um, you might have an interesting conversation. It's just a nice space apart from the noise of our world.
Do you have a regular group or individuals that you've turned it into? We all know that, when you can make something social, you're much more likely to stick to that behavior. For you, how does the heat protocol show up for you in your regular life? And are you have a date and time where you try to do it with other people to make it more consistent in your life?
Not yet. I'm working on that. One thing I don't have is a sauna in my backyard, and that's intentional. That's so I don't go and like sit there by myself because, I'm a writer. I work, in my home and so I need to get out. I need to get out of the house. Right. So there's a couple really nice sauna places here in Salt Lake City that I go to, and they're friendly. And, there's always, at the very minimum, there's some like excellent people watching to be done. And sometimes there's some good conversations to be had.
Any do's and don'ts that you want to share that are not the obvious ones of, making sure, we're not trying to, especially when it comes to the bath, we're not trying to like burn ourselves. We're not trying to,
Yeah.
go crazy all of a sudden. Anything you want to share about that?
Not overdoing it, I think is right out of the gate, I think is a big one. Again, we hear a lot of sort of prescriptions and protocols. If somebody on the internet says go in the sauna for 30 minutes at 190 degrees, maybe don't start with that, start with 10, right? Start with some reasonable and, listen to your body, right? And so for me, I try to go a little bit past the point where I start to think about getting out. Okay. So that's one. Number two, like pick the format that suits you and that's available to you. So if that happens to be infrared, that's fine. If it happens to be a hot tub, that's also fine. Um, you want to get a little uncomfortable, but you don't want to like crush yourself, right? Because then you won't come back. You won't enjoy it. Big mistake that my partner and I made when we went to Finland. And that was like going from the minor leagues to the major leagues, right? Right. That was like big league sauna. We didn't hydrate enough. We didn't drink enough, and we didn't have enough like salt. And so the next day we were just totally wiped out and bickering. And she's like, meh, 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 meh. Um, it was just because we had gotten too dehydrated. And it's really easy to do. You sweat a phenomenal amount in a sauna or in a hot yoga class, by the way. Um, yeah, I sweat like double in a hot yoga class what I do like on a bike ride. Don't do it every day, I think, when you're starting. That's another one. Um, I tend not to like to sauna early in the day because then I get sleepy, right? So I do it later in the day. It's a good adjunct to exercise, and that's a really interesting way to use sauna. And we have these Olympic marathoners here in Utah who they'll do their long training run and then they'll hop in the sauna after that to kind of keep that heart rate up, keep those endurance benefits going without beating up the body. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it's nice to see people stacking it along with exercise, do a little exercise session, do a little
Yeah.
sauna afterwards, get
Yeah.
that continuation of that heart rate exposure.
The study we referenced earlier found that people who were doing sauna often were doing it in conjunction with a workout, right? So you've got the sauna, you've got the workout, and then, maybe you're sleeping better, right? And then maybe you're eating better. And maybe you feel better mentally. It's like a snowball, right? Maybe that's the wrong metaphor because the snowball is not going to last very long in a sauna, but it's compounding benefits and compounding behaviors.
Yeah. And once you start to really understand the lay of the land of wellness and what really moves the needle forward, you start connecting the dots, which goes right into this thread that you wrote about. But you start connecting the dots that it really is about that. It's about these compounding behaviors that all support each other. And that if you just focus on them, it leaves a lot of room in your life to do all the other things and give love and attention to everything else that you care about. We don't need to be so consumed by our wellness protocols that it prevents us from living. And I thought you captured this beautifully. So I'm going to tee you up here.
Okay.
I'm going to tee you up here. You wrote a great thread, and the thread was titled 5 Ways to Escape the Gurus and Reclaim Your Health. All right. I'm going to read your tweets.
Oh
Okay.
boy.
You're the author, but I'm
Okay.
reading them here because I have them word for word. And
Here
we're
we
just
go.
going to do a director's cut version of each of them. Okay. Sounds good?
Sure. Yeah.
All right. Number one of the 5 ways to escape the gurus and reclaim your health. Number one, keep it simple. The two greatest drivers of health and longevity are cardio, respiratory fitness, and muscle strength. Focus on the basics. Go for a walk or run. Do some push ups. Get some good sleep. Avoid crappy food, especially late at night. Manage stress and nurture your friendships. Give us the director's cut version of not just why you wrote this first tweet, but even wanted to write about this thread in general.
Oh, I just think there's just a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of like conflicting information. I think there are a lot of people trying to make it, I think, more complicated than it needs to be. And frankly, most people, including me, struggle with just those basics. Like there are days when I don't get, activity or resistance in my life. And, I hate it. Like I was spending a lot of time in Charleston last fall. I gained a bunch of weight because the food's so good, so you got to get back to basics. And just think about that stuff that really matters and that really moves the needle. And that is activity, strength, decent diet, sleep, relationships, especially another thing that I'm working on. And, I think those are the core, right? It doesn't really need to be that complicated.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.
Number two. All right. Number two, out of 5 ways to escape the gurus and reclaim your health, keep it cheap. True health doesn't require expensive gadgets or supplements. The healthcare system and some gurus out there profit from complexity and illness. Skip the $100,000 red light beds. A good trainer can be a smart investment if you need motivation, and a nice bike or sauna might help too, but the fundamentals are low cost or free. Be skeptical of anything being heavily sold. Bill, everywhere we look these days, somebody's trying to sell us something.
Yeah, and it's understandable, on one level because our medical system is structured so that um they it it's designed to treat 6 people, right? And for money, right? So that's the business model. If you're talking about people staying healthy, there's there's less it's less profitable. And I'm not being cynical about it. A patient who stays healthy is really kind of like under the radar of our system, and they're kind of not generating any revenue, right? And so um people try to figure out ways to do that, which is great. Like if the medical profession could figure out how to focus attention on keeping people healthy, that would be awesome. And that would probably be worth something economically. But there are a lot of people out there selling things that often aren't proven or aren't well tested or aren't necessary. And so again, you know, I'm like Mr. Back to Basics. You can do resistance training. Like I could drop and do a few push-ups right now and it wouldn't cost me anything, right? And I could go make a pretty good meal or go to the grocery store and buy food for a pretty good meal. It wouldn't cost that much either, right? It would cost more than McDonald's, but that's the price I'm willing to pay. So that's really what I was trying to say. Like the stuff you need does not have to be expensive. And even if you can't afford to put a sauna in your backyard, you can probably afford a hot bath.
And so many YMCAs and places that are around there, places that are pretty cheap memberships,
It'll do. Yeah.
they'll have saunas, right?
Yeah.
Then you have a warm bath at home and you can still get a lot of the benefits that are there. Okay, let's go to number 3 on the list of 5 ways to escape the gurus and reclaim your health. Avoid perfectionism. Don't chase arbitrary elite goals like an Olympic level VO2 max. Progress matters more than perfection. Simply moving from below average to above average fitness for your age delivers huge benefits.
Yeah. And, I meet a lot of people who are in that situation. And I meet a lot of people who they're very concerned about health and longevity. And then you look at them and they're, they're like 90% of the way there. They're like doing great. And so there's sort of a steep curve um, from like doing nothing to doing something. And I think most people are still on the side of like not doing enough or doing nothing, right? So us adding a small amount of activity for a sedentary person really moves the needle a lot. And so that's really what I was talking about with that. Like you get a lot of gain from um, you know, let's say going from like a junky diet to a slightly better diet, or going from below average VO2 max to just above average for your age. I mean, that's a significant reduction in mortality risk. I've been thinking more about like, what are the entry points for people? And if you hold out this idea that you have to be perfect, then it becomes difficult to know where to start and it becomes sort of unsustainable. If the goal is really just to get better, everybody can do that, right? So if you're not walking, you can walk, right? And you'll see gain from that. You don't have to become an Olympic athlete certainly right away. The walking can lead to maybe bike riding. It could lead to maybe more bike riding, right? And you're climbing up the ladder. You don't have to go to the top right out of the gate.
Yeah, it's a great reminder. We can all fall into that trap, but that's why we need these little nudges to remember to do what we instinctually know, which is perfectionism in any category of our life is going to lead to a lot of unhappiness.
Just don't judge yourself as compared to others or some arbitrary standard.
Yeah, well, this sets up number 4 actually perfectly, which is you do you. Ignore rigid protocols pushed by internet influencers. They often feel like chores. Personalize habits so that they fit your life. Here's an example. You have a hack, which is you have a dog, and that dog forces you to get 10 to 12,000 steps daily. It builds strength. You're carrying dog food. It reduces stress, glucose, provides morning sun, social connection, and even blood pressure lowering pats.
That's right. My little longevity dog. I went through a period of not having a dog and I was just kind of miserable. Like I wasn't getting out for this like morning walk. And it dawned on me that my morning dog walk was like my foundational health practice. It's like I go out for half an hour, 45 minutes. Um, we walk up and down some hills, we walk on some trails, get a little bit of exercise. It kind of scrapes out the cobwebs, you know, um, gets rid of like some blood glucose, um, I think, right? I'll often stop. I'll like take my phone and dictate like a couple paragraphs in an email, so it gets the brain going. We have friends in the neighborhood, so it's social activity.
You're getting sunshine.
Sunshine, yeah, that's huge. And my mood shifts like, as soon as I walk out of the house and see, even today's a cloudy day, but just see the sky is just like, just great.
Yeah.
It's a total reset. And then, yeah, I'd like him to carry his own food sometimes, but sometimes I actually carry a pack with a bag of dog food in it, which he knows, by the way, when I'm doing that. And that adds like, it's like rucking light. So when I feel ambitious, I do that. Yeah, but that's something that makes, the larger point is that it's something that fits into my life and that I enjoy doing. I used to run a bit, but my body doesn't like that as much anymore. So we do more of the weighted walking, and I ride my bike. I enjoy that. And in the winter, I like to go cross country skiing. It's stuff that I like, fits into my life. I'll do it. I'll keep doing it. And rather than forcing myself to do something, the thing I have to force myself to do is the lifting side, right? I'm not like naturally a gym guy, so that's the thing I have to kind of make myself do. But I do that in a way that also works for me and makes sense for me.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, last one. Be proactive. Don't wait for problems. Get the data. Request the key screening tests, things like colonoscopies, advanced lipids, including ApoB, DEXA scans, especially after 50,
That's an
the
interesting one.
Gallery
Yep.
test, right?
Hmm.
The multi-cancer, screenings, some interesting data that's around those. Know your family history and act on it to avoid preventable issues. In Outlive, you guys wrote a lot about, being proactive and the
Yeah.
power of that, especially with things like, a lot of the younger audience members of mine know that we've been talking a lot about colon cancer and how that's
Hmm.
one of the top cancers for, young people
Yeah.
and how the guidelines on that are always adapting and getting a colonoscopy earlier, especially if you have any sort of family history of cancer that's there. So yeah, what else do you want to add into this insight? Because being proactive is often the one that I would say that sometimes traditional medicine has a challenge with.
Yeah.
There's some very loud voices that are on X, formerly known as Twitter, who largely see that, oh, I'm not convinced with the data around these advanced screenings and the false positives, or why everybody should be going out there and getting, a CCTA or some of these other cancer screenings like the Gallery test.
Yeah.
But when I look at it from an individual level, I want to know. And I'm not such a baby that I can't sort of hold multiple things into account. I'm not such a novice with my own health that I can't understand that, hey, there's maybe slight limitations with some of these screenings, but I'd rather know earlier so I can do something about that. But anyways, that's my rant, but this is your tweet, so I'll
That
turn
that
it
was
over
a
to
good
you.
that was a good rant. I like that rant. And it's interesting, and maybe you could help me understand why there is such a resistance to do tests that cost, a few $100 and might potentially uncover a life-threatening condition. And yet, you go farther down the road, let's say with cancer, right? And then sure, like here's a $200,000 chemotherapy drug or immunotherapy drug. And let's do the $900 test first and maybe avoid the $200,000 drug. And I think some of those tests need to be better, but something like the DEXA scan is a good example. There's a little bit of risk associated with obviously the radiation, but I think it gives you some interesting information, um, not only about body composition, not just like muscle, but where your fat is located, right? And how much fat you have. That's important. Bone density is
Bone density,
important.
yeah.
I have a neighbor, an older man, who is having a tough time right now because he's got some like spinal fractures due to osteoporosis that he didn't know that he had because men don't get DEXA scans.
Yeah.
If he'd gotten a DEXA scan 10 years ago when he was 60, maybe he could have been made aware and done something about it.
Absolutely. And I've seen firsthand in my own family that sure, there are the people that get so nervous about data. They don't want to know because there's already a
Oh,
history of
sure.
maybe anxiety or other things like that. That's the exception to the rule. And obviously, those people have to be mindful about any aspect of anything that they're navigating. And my heart goes out to them. But we have to also remember that, if you study the history of medicine, it was considered best practice in the mid 1900s that if somebody was diagnosed with cancer, it was up to the doctor to determine whether or not they wanted to tell them because they thought that uh, maybe if they told them and they were older in life that they could spiral out of control and they would be so depressed that that
Oh,
depression would
wow.
be worse off. And we know now that you would that's not right. People should
No.
know the information and be able to decide themselves how they want to process it and handle it. And what I've seen in my own family is that when people get that more advanced information, even if they know, for example, that they have some extra visceral fat or they have extra subcutaneous fat that's out there, seeing their actual muscle mass breakdown in a DEXA scan, seeing their bone density levels and how close they are to being, you know, osteopenic in their data, it's motivating because when you see that, you're like, okay, I can't hide from this. I need to do something about this information.
Yeah, I just got one of those scales where you grab the handle. Um,
Yeah. The
and
biodensity
it's
scales.
yeah, shocking information. Uh, but it's motivating, right? To like, okay, I got to do something about this body fat situation. It's not as great for like the bone density of different parts of your body, but you know, it gets you part of the way there.
Bill, this has been great. And I want to acknowledge you for all your work. You were way ahead of the curve. Even with the first book, what was it called?
Spring Chicken.
Spring Chicken. You're way ahead of the curve, and your work has been something that's shaped the conversations around health and wellness and in the right direction, I would argue. For a lot of the stuff that could easily distract us, I'm the first person to put my hand up in the air and say that I've been distracted about, you know, what matters and what doesn't. And not that I have it all figured out now. I'm sure I'll change my mind in the future about things as well too. And that's the beauty of evolving our thought. And I've been somebody to distract other people with some of the content that I've done in the past, but that's the human side of me. And we can always end up shifting that and doubling down on the basics. And especially with the new book, you've made the strong argument of why proactive, intentional heat exposure and tapping into our evolutionary biological ability to be heat adapted is something that we would be better off prioritizing as one of those basics, if not just for the social benefits that come along with doing sauna with the people that we love in our life. So I want to acknowledge you for writing this book. It's really great to read the story, the history, but also have the evidence base to remind us about why heat matters so much in our lives.
Thank you, Dhru. And, you know, I think being curious is a nice attribute that you have and takes you in some interesting directions. And I think it's that's kind of what drove this book, is my curiosity about this thing that I kind of thought I didn't like, but had some interesting data around it. So let's try it, see if it works.
Well, one little factoid that I learned about you is that it seems to be that curiosity comes from some of your Montessori background.
That's true. Yeah. I was a Montessori kid. Yeah. So they just send me off to like, you know, with like some crayons or something and a big roll of paper. And I do a whole big like PowerPoint presentation about dinosaurs, you know, on a 8-foot long scroll. Go down the rabbit hole. That's what I've always done.
Bill, the book is out there. It's fantastic. We've linked to it in the show notes. Hotwired, How the Hidden Power of Heat Makes Us Stronger. I'm excited for my audience to check it out. Please buy a copy, but even more important, integrate the power of heat into your life. Thank you, Bill, for your work and for being on the podcast with us today.
Thanks, Dhru. Great conversation. Awesome. Thanks for having me.
YouTube, if you enjoyed what you just saw, keep watching for more great content on how to improve your brain and your life.
Those who did sauna more than 1 time per week, so 2 to 3 times per week, they had a 40% lower risk of dying early, you can say, compared to those who only did once a week.